You obviously made the choice to go there, to sit in the chamber, and to listen to Netanyahu. Are you happy with what you heard?
You know, I was not particularly happy with the speech. There wasn't really much new. I was hoping that maybe he would make a gesture toward the ceasefire agreement that President Biden has proposed. I was actually quite disappointed in Prime Minister Netanyahu's characterization of people who disagree with him. Look, I understand that people have differences, but he chose to cast any protest against his policies as being the subject of manipulation from Iran. Now, that may be happening, for sure, but that doesn't mean that everybody who disagrees with him or protests against him or his policies is somehow being manipulated. I thought that was an unfortunate characterization on his part, especially when about 7 out of 10 Israeli citizens would like to see Netanyahu depart the political stage. He's not a popular guy there, and I don't think he did anything to help himself here.
Well, Congressman, it's worth pointing out that President Biden hasn't been ultra popular with some constituencies, also because of the question of Israel and his handling of the ongoing war in Gaza. When we think about protesters, we certainly saw a protest vote during the primary cycle, even though he is no longer running. It raises the question of whether Kamala Harris, now that she is the presumptive Democratic nominee, is going to face the same issue with young people, with Muslim Americans. How does she skirt around that?
Well, I don't think she can skirt around it. She has to deal with it head on and articulate her vision. She's been President Biden's vice president. She's been his partner. But there is something that happens when you become the candidate yourself. She's still the vice president, but she will have to articulate her own views. And I think it remains to be seen if she's able to do, as you said, have any impact on the way President Biden is perceived on this issue. I'm a Democrat, and I'm a supporter of President Biden, but I have disagreed with him on his policy toward the prosecution of this war. It's evolved, I will say that, but I have expressed my disagreements with him as well. And that's why I was disappointed in Prime Minister Netanyahu's approach. Disagreement is democracy. Disagreement does not mean because somebody has another view that they should be demonized or vilified or ridiculed as if those views are not legitimate. I think that was a mistake.
Well, of course, we'll see Netanyahu tomorrow at the White House meeting with President Biden and then separately with Vice President Harris. When we think about your state in particular, Michigan, this was one of the areas in which we thought the protest vote over Israel and the Palestinian cause was be most problematic for Biden. What is the winning message for Kamala Harris for Michigan, knowing it is a critical swing state, not just on that issue, but the issues that resonate for your constituents and others across the state?
I think it really always comes back to the economy. The economy has been a challenge, but it's moving in the right direction. We've had incredible job growth, where the economy is growing. Inflation, while still a problem, is beginning to come under control. Even the Fed is beginning to recognize that. But I think what Vice President Harris is going to have to do is articulate a vision for the future. What I suggest she focus on is to continue to work on those kitchen table issues. One in particular is the affordability of housing. That's a challenge across the economic spectrum. So my advice, to the extent that anyone is listening, is to lean in on that issue because it makes a difference. That's one. I think the other difference that we see is not just on policy, but enthusiasm about the next generation, about sort of turning the page, passing the torch, whatever euphemism we might want to use. You know, we had a 77-year-old Donald Trump, an 81-year-old Joe Biden, and a lot of people back home that I was hearing from were saying, look, we want the next generation to have their shot. Now we have that possibility with Kamala Harris as the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. And I think that has to be part of the message.
Well, as we talk about messaging and turning the page, Congressman, it's worth pointing out you yourself have decided not to seek re-election after your current term. President Biden now has come to that same decision for himself. He will be a one-term president. He's going to explain that to the American people in an Oval Office address in prime time tonight. What do you expect to hear from him?
Well, I think what I hope to hear is a chance for him to cement the legacy. When he ran, 4 years ago, he said he wanted to be a transitional president. I believe he did the country a service by ending the first Trump presidency. I think he's also doing a service by handing to the next generation the opportunity to lead. It's a chance for him to talk about his legacy, to cement that legacy, and also to provide, I think, some direction for the future that perhaps Vice President Harris can use as a part of her campaign messaging.
Well, I guess I have a question for you about the direction of the more immediate future. If he also uses this speech tonight to in part lay out what he still wants to accomplish with his remaining months in office, can any of that happen with the cooperation of Congress? Is there still room in what is already effectively a lame duck session for him, but is getting close for you guys as well, as everybody's heading out of town for the summer starting tomorrow? Is there room for more legislative accomplishment?
I think there's room, but I have to be honest with you, I think it's really going to be tough. We have divided government here. There is no true majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats are in the minority, but the sort of governing sector of the Republican conference, they're in the minority too. So you really don't have a functional majority unless there's a way to get a bipartisan deal put together. I think there's one thing we might be able to do, we should be able to do, and that is a bipartisan farm bill. That typically has not been overly political. We ought to be able to do that. We've done it in the past, but it's going to take a change of will in the Republican leadership to say to those dozen or so members who really don't want to be a part of a governing majority that we're going to set them aside and the adults are going to take over. If we did that, we could actually get something like a bipartisan farm bill to the president's desk that I think he would sign. Beyond that, it's keeping the government open, and hope is we're going to be able to do that as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Congressman, because after everybody leaves tomorrow, summer break, you're back September 9th, 3 weeks out from the deadline of September 30th. I'm sure everyone is excited for the summer break, but when class is back in session, what are we in for?
I think we're in for a real challenge to make sure that we can keep the government open. And the only way that is going to happen, is if we set aside the partisanship and compromise. Around this town, it's one of the reasons that I get frustrated here, and I'm finishing. Compromise has become a dirty word. Compromise is the way our Constitution was formulated. It's the way our government is supposed to work, and the only way we're going to keep government open is if we come to some sort of bipartisan compromise. We're better off doing that sooner rather than later. I've been disappointed that the appropriations bills that the Republican leadership has put forward have been highly partisan, not the product of bipartisan compromise. Sooner or later, they know they're going to have to compromise in order to keep the government open. Why not just do that now? Why put the country through this? It's not responsible.